Good morning. We begin by thanking our sponsors, the Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Mar Cheshvan, Yanky and Aliza Statman, and Yitzy and Rebecca Statman, in commemoration of the first yarzheit of Menucha Shaindl Yehudis Bas Dovid Yosef, as well as Shmuel and Robyn Korobkin, in commemoration of the 25th yarzheit of Robyn's mother, Melanie Solomon, Aleh Shalom, Pessa Mira Bas Chaim, the Neshamas should have an Aliyah, the family should have an Achama. We thank Jeff and Debbie Schwartz for sponsoring the Week of Learning in commemoration of the 5th yarzheit of Debbie's mother, Shulamit Bas Shmuel, the Neshamas should have an Aliyah, and the family should have an Achama. Today's daf is Nedarim daf Tes Zayin. We're going to be picking up with the Mishnah on the beginning of daf Tes Vav Amud Beis. Mishnah writes as follows: Shavua. So the first thing we have to notice is that we are beginning the Mishnah with the lashon of Shavua. This is Maseches Nedarim, but there are a lot of comparisons and contrasts between Nedarim and Shavuos, and this Mishnah is dealing with a Shavua. So a person takes a Shavua. She'eni Yasha. So you see clearly, Shavua is when he talks about himself. A Neder is where he talks about the item. Here he says about himself, Shavua she'eni yashan. A person makes a Shavua that he's not going to sleep. She'eni medaber, that I will not speak. She'eni mahalech, that I will not go. Aser. Indeed, that Shavua does take effect, and therefore he's not allowed to sleep, he's not allowed to speak, and he's not allowed to go wherever he said he wasn't going to go. Even though these are a davar she'en bo mamish, not a tangible item, but he was speaking about himself. He was forbidding himself from engaging in any of these activities, and therefore the Shavua works. Now the Mishnah continues. If a person expresses the words, Karban lo ochalach, or ha karban she'ochalach, or lo karban lo ochalach mutter. A little bit confusing language this person is using. Exactly what he meant to say is a little bit unclear, and it's part of what happened, part of why it doesn't work. It's also not clear if the Mishnah is switching back now to Nedarim, where a person is saying, Karban lo ochalach, now he's speaking about the item. The simple understanding is that it's continuing to speak about a Shavua, and the person expresses the Shavua with the language of Karban lo ochalach. In other words, it will be like a karban, and therefore I will not eat it. Or ha karban, this is like a karban she'ochalach, that which I will eat. In other words, that which I will eat, I am making it as a karban for myself. It's a little bit of a convoluted way of speaking, and that is part of the reason why it's not going to work. And karban lo ochalach, lo karban, and it's not a karban, what lo ochalach, what I will not eat, which implies that what I will eat is not a karban either, or is a karban. Again, it's backwards. It's very confusing. Now, if you look through the Ran explains this. It goes through all the cases, and the basic idea is, as we spoke at earlier, if a person takes a shvua b'chayi karban, on the life of a karban, it doesn't work. A person wants to take a shvua with the name of Hashem, or with the name of Hashem in a Sefer Torah, that's a valid shvua. A person takes a shvua on the life of a karban, it doesn't have any effect. And that's why it doesn't work. If you look at the Ran, it's pretty extensive about it. At the end, with regard to the last term, it's on the next page in Tezayin Amud Aleph. There's like a period in the Ran. It says la karban lo ochalach. Just notice it says la karban lo ochalach. In our mission, it says lo karban lo ochalach. Nami shari dekivan de lamed psucha. Since the lamed has a patach underneath, so it's la karban ka'amar lo karban mashma. It means low carbon. Again, in our mission, it actually says low carbon. And then it says, V'lekil memar d'michlal lav mashma hamasha yochel yehi carbon. That will imply that what I will eat will be a carbon. Tamas nisnikra meir kim nala, Rameir halas d'michalavat ha'shmehein. Rameir does not hold to the concept of michalavat ha'shmehein, that you can imply the yes from the no, and therefore it's not going to work. Okay, the Gemara continues. Mani masnisin. Who is the Tana of this Mishnah? The Gemara says, Rabbi Meir he. Must be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda, lo shani le karban, lo shani le ha karban. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we mentioned this earlier in the previous Mishnah, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the point is it has to say ke carbon. You have to have a chaf there. So it doesn't make a difference if it says ha carbon or carbon, makes no difference. So it must be that it's going to be a Reb Meir. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, ema seifa. Let's learn the seifa. The la carbon lo ochalach. The person says la carbon lo ochalach, which is the expression we just discussed. It's mutter. The Mishnah says clearly it's mutter. The problem is, Batanan, we learned in the Mishnah, la carbon lo ochalach, Reb Meir oser. So Meir says it is a valid expression of a shavua. So how could our Mishnah say it's mutter if Reb Meir says it's aser? It seems to be a pretty big stira. The reason why it's going to be aser is because nase ka'omar la carbon yehe. We say it's as if this person says la carbon yehe. This should be like a carbon, and then it's going to be like a neder. Lefikach lo ochalach. Therefore, I am forbidding myself from eating it, which is the expression of a shvuah. In other words, that's why Rameir says it's going to work, is because we have to play with his words a little bit. When he says la carbon lo ochalach, what he means to say is this should be like a carbon, and therefore, what I'm saying is I'm not going to eat it, and that's why it's asros. Now, our Mishnah is a problem because our Mishnah says that it's mutter. Where it says lo kasha had amar la carbon. Had amar low carbon. So there is a difference between a la carbon and the full expression of low carbon. It's not a carbon, which is our Mishnah, which means still low havi carbon. In other words, the bottom line is our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and the fact that our Mishnah says it's mutter, and in the other place we kind of fix his sentence to mean it should be like a carbon, and therefore I won't eat it. The fact that our Mishnah doesn't do that is because our Mishnah actually has the word low carbon, so it's very hard to say when a person says low carbon that it's not a carbon, that what he meant to say was it is a carbon. So therefore our Mishnah, it's not a carbon, and therefore it's not a valid expression of a shvuah or neder, and therefore it's going to be mutter. Now, we're going to see very soon that even at times when a person says something which seems to be very clear, that based on the context, it could be that he means the opposite, and that's the idea of sarcasm. And we're going to see very soon that it's not always so clear that if a person is very clear, he articulates something really very clearly, that that's what he means, and really everything depends on the context. So even though our Mishnah says low carbon, you're going to see in about a minute that that's not always going to be the case. Shvuah, the next Mishnah. Shvuah lo ochalach. That's one example. Again, clearly, the Mishnah says shvuah. So we're talking about a shvuah. Shvuah is when a person forbids himself, an isser gavra. He's talking about himself, not the item. Shvuah lo ochalach. A shvuah, again, the context from the Mishnah seems to mean that I will not eat it. Ha shvuah she'ochalach. This is a shvuah, that which I will eat. Again, another expression of that which I will eat is included in the shvuah, which let's just assume at this point means he's saying he won't eat it. Or lo shvuah lo ochalach. There's no shvuah on what I won't eat. All those cases, it's aser. It's aser, in other words, lo shvuah, there's no shvuah on what I won't eat, which means what I will eat, there is a shvuah. Now, so that's how the Gemara works it out. Now, it's just important to point out, the first thing that anybody would ask is if this Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Meir, which we just established about a minute ago. And remember, our Gemara sticks Gemara between all these little snippets of the Mishnah, but it's one long Mishnah. This is one long Mishnah. Now, the assumption is that if we establish the first 3 lines of the Mishnah to be Rabbi Meir, the rest of the Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Meir. Now, over the last few days, we already were pretty clear that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that we don't say Mechlal Lav Ata Shemehein. Rabbi Meir expects you to be very clear what you mean and what you don't mean. So if you say no, you mean no, and we're not going to imply the yes from the no. Now, clearly we just did that, because we said, lo shvuah, lo ochalach. There's no shvuah on what I won't eat. So there's a double negative here. There's no shvuah on what I won't eat, but there is a shvuah on what I will eat. And the Mishnah says it's a valid neder. So how does this work? So you have to look at the Ran over here to understand this. This is critical. And the Ran on the left side of the page, I would say about 2/3 of the way down, at the beginning of the line, it says Shvuas Lamed Vav in parentheses. And now the Ran says, all of this that we've been saying so clearly up until now, there are mayors of the opinion that we don't say Mechalav Atashmehin. In other words, we'll never pull a yes out of a no. Hanimili, that's specifically talking about bimamona, when there's a relevance to a monetary matter. Inami be'isura de'is bimamona, when we're talking about a matter of isser, permissibility, or an area where it's going to be prohibited, in a matter of isser, but it has to be some type of isser to ispe memona that's relevant to money. Ava be'isura greda, when a person is talking about isser alone, in other words, specifically talking about isser, isle, he does hold of mechalav atashmeyahin. He explains, Nedarim isura de ispe memona ninhu. Nedarim is always going to be an isser that's relevant to monetary matters. Why mishkachas bahu balo chefza the ha'enon chalan al darash shein bo mamish. In neder, as we said a number of times up until now, a neder always is talking about the item that is in discussion. Will I eat this loaf of bread? I shouldn't say that. Is this loaf of bread permissible? Or is this slice of meat permissible? Is this glass of wine? Is this water? Are my eyes going to be permissible to close and go to sleep? It's always relevant on an item. So even though it's a matter of isser, because Nedarim fall into the category of an isser, nevertheless, it's always relevant to something that has some type of monetary value or some type of tangible effect. Avol shavuos einon ela isura greda. It's simply an isser. When a person takes a shvuah, he is imposing upon himself an isser. It's not a davar sheish bo mamish. It's not tangible. It's all isser. Shehuchal begufo bekiven de isura greda ninu. Since it is only an isser, afilu Rabbi Meir moda darmina bu mechalav atashmeyahin. Rabbi Meir is going to agree that we say mechalav atashmeyahin. Now this is such a critical ran. It should even be part of the Gemara. Because we've been so clear up until now, every time we use this concept of Michlalav Atashmeyahin, that can be Rav Meir. Rav Meir doesn't buy into this logic that Michlalav, that when you say no, I could extrapolate from what you said no about to understand what you mean to say yes about. Now, that's not a logic that Rav Meir uses. The Ran just told us, by the way, that's not 100% true. It's 100% true in Maseches Nedarim. Because Nedarim is a matter of Isser, it's a matter of a prohibition, but it's always going to be relevant to something which has tangible monetary value. A loaf of bread, or a slice of meat, or something else which is tangible and can have some type of monetary effect. However, when it comes to a Shavuah, the whole Shavuah is not tangible. Shavuah is Isser. I am imposing upon myself an Isser. And Rameir is of the opinion that we do say Mechalav Atashmeyahin. From the no, I can extrapolate the yes. Rameir does buy into that concept when we're talking about something which is only relevant to Isser, and therefore when the Mishnah is talking about Shavuos, which is only Isser, Rameir is perfectly fine with the concept of Mechalav Atashmeyahin. Now, interestingly, the Ran says it clearly like that, but if you look in the Rush, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you look at the Rush says something similar, but he says, he doesn't say because Shvuah is Isser, it's Shvuah is Chamira. A Shvuah is more strict, it's much more stringent. He doesn't say this because of Isser, he says it's because it's more strict. So all the Rishonim have to step in here to somehow understand how all of a sudden Rameir is buying it Mechalav Atashmeyahin. That from the no you could extrapolate the yes, but the Gemara doesn't explain it. So the Ran gives his explanation, and the Rosh just says because his Shavuah is more chomer, it's more stringent. The Gemara says as follows: Mechlal, this Mishnah seems to imply Dehash Shavuah she'ochalach. And when a person says, and that's how we translate it in the Mishnah, the second line in the Mishnah is Hashavua she'ochalach. In other words, which means this is a Shavuah, that which I will eat, which means that I won't eat. And the Gemara says, Mechlal seems to imply the Hashavua she'ochalach, when a person expresses the words, here is a Shavuah, about which I will eat, which the lo achil namashma. The person seems to be saying, I won't eat. The problem is, V'raminu, this is the stira, Shavuos, if you go to the first parak of Masechah Shavuos, it says, Shavuos shtayim shehein arba. there's two expressions, but they can manifest themselves in 4 cases, which is she'ochel v'shelo ochel, I will eat or I won't eat. She'achalti v'shelo achalti, that I ate or I didn't eat. In other words, I will, I won't, I did, I didn't. Those are the 4 types of shavuos. Either future, I will, I won't, or past tense, I did, I didn't. That's how a person can take a shavuah. So now, midika amar she'ochel, you have to add in a word. The Bach adds in a word. So the Gemara is missing a word over here. Midika amar she'ochel v'shelo ochel, that I will eat or that I won't eat. She'achalti v'shelo achalti, that I ate or I didn't eat. Machlal de she'ochel l'cha da'achilna mashma. She'ochel means that I will eat. Remember, now we're in the world of Shavuos, where a person is talking about himself, not about an item. So now the word she'ochel literally translates as, I will eat. The problem is, in our Mishnah, she'ochel seems to mean that I won't eat. So now how do we make Meseches Nedarim's language and Meseches Shavuos' language be consistent with each other? Our Mishnah seems to imply that when a person says, Ha-shavua she'ochel, it means he's taking a shvuah that he won't eat. The problem is the language of Meseches Shavuos seems to imply that when a person says she'ochel, it means that they will eat. Amar Abaya says, she'ochel shtei lishonos mashma. It means both. And context is everything. This is such an important line from Abaya. The context is everything. You can't live your life with little sound bites. You have to understand the whole context of what happened over here. And he explains. I'll give you an example. Hayu misarvim bo'lecho. Someone was being pressured to eat. Kiva Omar, achilna v'su shavua she'ochel. Person is not eating. And someone is trying to convince him. The language that's used here by Rashi, by the Mefarish, is maftsirabo. They're pressuring him. They're pressuring a person to eat. And the person responds, he says, okay, fine. Achilna. Fine, I'll eat. You know what? The person expresses, not only will I eat, but I promise you, I'll take a shvuah that I'm going to eat. In such a case, the context of that conversation is the person is being pressured to eat, and he responds and says, okay, fine, I will eat. In such a case, yes, she'ochel means I will eat. Shvuah, and you see the shvuah she'ochel, then it means he will eat. In other words, if his previous two statements, the 2 phrases that he verbalized before were that I will eat, and then he follows up with a shvuah that says, yes, I will eat. So okay, the context of it there means that he will eat. Aval, amar lo achilna, v'su, amar shvuah she'ochel, lo achilna ka'amar. Again, you're inviting someone to your house for lunch, and he says, I'm not coming. I'm sorry, I don't want to come for lunch. You say, come on, come to us for lunch. We're going to have a great time. It's going to be awesome. The food will be great. He says, I'm sorry, I can't get out today for lunch. I'm very busy. And you're back and forth. You're pressuring him. And finally, the guy says, you know what? All right, I'll be there. Sure? All right, I'll be there. Sarcastically. Everything about what he's saying is sarcastic. And you know what? Not only will I be there, I'll take a shua that I'll be there. Come on. You know what the guy's talking about at that point. That's what Abaya says. I'm not coming to eat. So then the whole thing is lo achilna kamar. He's being sarcastic when he says that he's making the taking the neder. So again, this is an example of where the person expressed the opposite of what he's doing, but you can't just pull out one tiny little line over here. This is the concept of in psychology of the meta-communication. And when a person says something, you can't just highlight the words that they said. If the person says, oh, dinner was delicious, and they take their whole plate and chuck it straight in the garbage, you understand the person meant the food was inedible, even though the words that came out of their mouth was the food is delicious. So you have to really take into context everything that's going on. That's why Abaya says, don't get so nervous from the fact that in our Mishnah, she'ochel meant they won't eat. In Meseches Shavuos, it means it will eat. The word she'ochel, depending on the context, could either mean I will or I won't. Rashi disagrees, and he says, she'ochel dishavua she'i ochel ka'amar. When a person says she'ochel, what he was trying to say was she'i ochel. He was trying to verbalize that he won't eat. But again, he swallowed it all together, and it sounded like she'ochel. So the Gemara says, okay, and came pshita. So the person said, I'm not eating. So what's wrong with that neder? Am I lememra? What's the news in this line that a person takes a shvuah that he won't eat, that he can't eat. Our Mishnah needs to be telling me something new. We don't need a Mishnah to tell you that if a person takes a shvuah that he's not going to eat lunch, that the shvuah works. Gemara says, Ma'od tema mekim lishnehi te'itkal le kamash malan. In other words, you might think that perhaps the guy slipped up. The guy slipped up when he said she'i ochel. He meant to say she'ochel, but he stuttered a little bit, and he said she'i ochel instead of saying she'ochel. Kamash malan, that we're not going to fix up his language. Now, on the way in this morning, Michael asked me, why can't you just say what you mean and mean what you say? So, it happens to be, the Rosh over here asks a similar question. He's like, why don't you just ask the guy what he meant? What do we get, Yored l'sof daitel shel adam? A person took a shvuah, and you know what? Maybe he was stuttering. The guy said, she'i ochel, that I won't eat. You know what? Maybe he was stuttering, he meant to say she'ochel. Just go to the guy and say, what do you mean, sir? You told me, you took a shvuah that you're not going to eat. Okay, that's what you said. You took a shvuah, she'i ochel. Yeah, we're done with the daf for the day. Just ask the guy, what do you mean, for heaven's sake? All right, so he says, the problem is, 1 second. Kivin dahotzi b'svasav she'i ochel lo mamnina lev ma'dik amar basar hachi. So says the Rosh, which is on the bottom of the page, that once a person expresses something, so then he expressed it. We can't use the dvarim shebalev over here. He said something. He's an innocent Jew. He comes to the Rav and he says, Rabbi, I'll do whatever you tell me. This is what I said. And what did I mean? I don't know. But this is what I said. What's the halacha? Okay? Just tell me what the halacha is. And that's really, essentially, he's even saying, I don't even know. I'm not sure. I took a shvuah. Maybe I meant this, maybe I meant that. But what I said is she'i ochel. So says Rav Ashi, you might think that you could kind of fix up his language because it's just a strange thing to say. Kamash Malan, no. We don't get involved. We take the language as it says. So now the Gemara says, Abaya lot amar tam Ravashi. Abaya does not agree with Ravashi. In other words, he does say the context is very important over here. Why the lo katani she'i ochel? Slight problem. Ravashi didn't say she'i ochel. So in other words, it'd be very nice if it said she'i ochel. That's just not what it says. So Abaya says, I'd rather add context to this instead of changing the words of the Mishnah. And Rav Ashi nadi min tam do Abaya. Rav Ashi moved away from the tam of Abaya, which this has to be. You have to just notice how the Gemara contrasts the way that it discusses why Abaya doesn't agree with Rav Ashi and the way that Rav Ashi doesn't agree with Abaya. When it comes to Abaya, it says Abaya lo omar tam Rav Ashi. He doesn't say the same reason as Rav Ashi. And when it says Rav Ashi was nadi min tam do Abaya. Now nadi min tam. So if you look at the Mefarish, the Rashi on the side, it says nodad v'sor. He turned away from it. So Abaya clearly just ignored Rav Ashi's reasoning. Why? It's not what it says in the Mishnah. We can't add any words into the Mishnah. But when it came to Rav Ashi, he kind of turned away from it. It seems like he's not really disagreeing with Abaya. He holds like Abaya in halacha that context matters. He just didn't want to explain our Mishnah that way. Why not? Kasavar shelo ochel nami mashmer shtei lashonos. He says everything could really mean two lashonos, and shelo ochel could also mean two things. Why? Because hayu mesarvim bo lechel. They were pressuring somebody to eat. V'amar lo achilna, lo achilna. And then he adds on v'amar nami shavua bein she'ochel bein shelo ochel hadein achil lamashma. Again. Someone goes over to another person and says, it's very important to eat lunch today. And he says, I'm just very busy right now. He says, you got to eat lunch. You know what your day's going to be able to have lunch. He says to him, I'm not going to eat. Lo achelna. In other words, he's saying to him, of course I'm going to eat. I'm not eating now, or I won't eat this, or I won't eat at your house. But he is essentially sarcastically just responding, do you think I'm not going to eat? So now lo achelna could also mean both ways. And then if he takes the shvuah afterwards and says, shvuah nami, v'amar nami shvuah, ben she'ochel ben shelo ochel, hadein achila mashma, the amar, and therefore v'ikul trutz nami lishna de shvuah, lishma shvua shelo ochel, shvua d'lo achilna ka'amar, el tana paska she'ochel da'achilna mashma, v'shlo ochel lo achilna mashma. Therefore, Rashi says anything can really be switched around once you start adding context to it. And even saying I won't eat can mean sarcastic that I will eat, and I will eat means sarcastic that I won't eat. Ultimately, the bottom line is the context could always change the definition of what you're saying. And therefore, says Rav Ashi, I'd rather just focus on what it says in the Mishnah, and even though parenthetically doesn't say she'i ochel, but if we add in that yud over there, that was what was intended to say, and the Mishnah is just going to be clear. She'ochel means I will eat, the lo achel means I won't eat, and again, if the context changes the meaning, says Rav Ashi that I'll buy into it, but ultimately that's not the pshat of the Mishnah. Now, if you turn the page to the Ran, because the problem is that the Ran extends over all the way to the other side of the page. So the Ran on this Gemara goes all the way halfway down Daf Tezayin and Mevez. Just important, it's a Nedarim is a little bit more difficult to read, but again, the Ran, while he writes a lot, he does add in a lot of halacha l'maisa, so it's important just to get to see that. Linin halacha, it's about 3/4 of the way down in the skinny lines. Linin halacha, kvar kasafti beperak shvuas shtayim, Basra, and the second shvuas shtayim, because there's two of them in second shvuas. Shaharambam zal pasak kabaya. The Rambam paskins like Abaya. Ukisugi tahasam. The herachti sham b'tayme shel davar b'siyata dishmaya. Aval haramban zal pasak Rav Ashi de la'olam sha'ochel de'achil namashma. V'shalo ochel shlo ochel mashma. So it's machlokas rishonim. According to the Rambam, whenever someone says something, we kind of put the neder, or I should say, we put the shvu on hold. We analyze the whole situation. We take all the context into account. And then we say, you know what? She'ochel in your case meant I won't eat, or she'ochel in your case meant I will eat. According to the Rambam, according to the Ramban, that's not how it works. She'ochel, whatever you express in your mouth. You said you'll eat. The shvuah is that you'll eat. You said you won't eat. The shvuah is that you won't eat. So that's how the Rishonim deal with that. How do we paskin? Probably like the Rambam. I have to check the Shulchan Aruch, but probably like the Rambam, but please don't come ask me this question. Okay. Now, I mentioned before that all these Mishnayos are really connected. Now, the next Mishnah continues, Zeh chomer b'shvuos mi b'nedarim. This is what is more strict about a shvuah than a nedarim. V'chomer b'nedarim mi b'shvuos. And this is what is more strict about a neder than a shvuah. And interestingly, it's clearly going back to what we said before. Because the Mishnah doesn't go ahead and say things, it just moves on with ketzad. How does this work? In other words, there's something more chomer about a neder than a shvuah. Something more chomer about a shvuah than a neder. What's that talking about? It's talking about the fact that it could be chal, it could take effect on something which is a davar she'ein bo mamish. Now, and he goes on to explain, Ketzad, Amar Konim, or on a Dvar Mitzvah. The Mishnah explains, Ketzad, how does this work? Amar Konim, Sukkah, Sha'ani Osa. Person takes a shvuah, a neder, on a sukkah that he will make. Which is interesting. You have to, again, just notice this. He doesn't say Sukkah Sha'ani Yoshev, a sukkah that I'm going to sit in, Sukkah Sha'ani Osa. Which means he's talking about the building, making the sukkah. The language seems to imply that he's talking about the mitzvah of building a sukkah, which is a fascinating discussion, because who said there's a mitzvah to build a sukkah? There's a mitzvah to sit in the sukkah. Who said there's a mitzvah to actually build a sukkah? So, again, this is an interesting sukkah, it's an interesting topic, but clearly, at the end of Hilchas Yom Kippur, it says that after Yom Kippur, a person should immediately start building the sukkah. Wak is mitzvah, baliyotcha tach mitzena. Person should go from mitzvah to mitzvah. So, again, it seems like that's a hefsher mitzvah. Like, in order to be able to fulfill your mitzvah on Sukkot, you're going to have to build it. But it doesn't seem like it's a mitzvah in and of its own right. But again, we do see that there's an expression that the building of the sukkah is a mitzvah. There's also a Rashi elsewhere which seems to imply that building a sukkah is a mitzvah. There's definitely some element of a mitzvah. I just would point out, I think that sukkah shani os over here, he means to say doing the mitzvah. I don't think he's talking about actually building the sukkah. The Mishnah over here, even though the language says sukkah shani osa, he's taking a neder from the sukkah that I'm going to make, that I won't sit in it. Again, why don't the Mishnah just tell us what it meant? This must be one of those cases where context matters. Right? Sukkah shani osa, he means he's not going to sit in the sukkah. Lulav shani notel, he takes a neder that he won't shake a lulav. Tefillin shani meniach. The Nedarim aser. By Nedarim, indeed, the neder works and it becomes aser for him to sit in the sukkah. It becomes aser for him to shake his lulav. It becomes aser for him to wear his tefillin. B'shvuos mutter, by shvu it's mutter. Why? Because she'ein nishpayin lav ar mitzvah. A person cannot take a shvuah or be over a mitzvah. So again, this is a clear difference between a neder and a shvuah. A shvuah is, I am imposing an isra upon myself. Now, I'm not allowed to impose isurim on myself if Hashem already told me that I should do that. We can't disagree on these things. Hashem already worked out disagreement with Klal Yisrael. We're mushbach Yomi from our Sinai that we will keep the Torah. So I can't just take a shvuah that I won't. But a neder, I can forbid myself from this specific or this particular item. Turn to the page, Daf Tezayin Beis. The Gemara says, Chomer, you're telling me it's more strict, mechlal than neder. It sounds like it is a neder. The problem is that it says it's mutter. What does this mean? When you talk about something being more strict, again, because we have to really understand, the Mishnayos are connected. So when it says zeh chomer, when it came to sleeping, a person takes a neder that he won't sleep. What do we say? It doesn't work. You can't take a neder on sleep. So that's the chumrah of a shvuah of a neder. That a shvuah is more chomer than a neder. You can take a shvuah that you won't sleep. You can't take a neder that you won't sleep. The problem is, that's not a matter of chumrah or not chumrah. It doesn't work at all. Chumrah sounds like there's a chumrah over here. It works, but it's not as chumrah. If it's not relevant, it's not a chumrah. So the Gemara says, chumrah mechlal the nederhu. Mutter katani. The previous Mishnah said when a person takes a neder, if he won't sleep, it's mutter. Gemara says, aseidach idach bava katani. There were a lot of small snippets of Mishnah that we mentioned, and we're referring to the other part of the Mishnah, which is Shavua she'eni yashin she'eni medaber she'eni mahalech aser zecham b'shvus Nedarim. And if you'll remember on the previous daf, we learned that there's a concept called bayachel midrabanan. So even though there's no bal yachel on that, but there is a concept of dvarim hamutarim va'acherim nagu bahen iser. This is what we learned yesterday. Even though it's technically mutter, but others already were no agisser, so there's a din of bal yachel midrabanan. So yes, there is the language of chumrah is relevant. It does apply. Why? Because there is a din midrabanan on that neder. All right, the Gemara continues. Chomer b'nedarim b'shvuos. A neder is more chomer than a shvuah. Ketzad went on to explain that a neder can take effect on a mitzvah, but a shvuah cannot. Rav Kahana Masni, Amar of Gidel, Amar Rav. Rav Kahana learned the following statement in the name of Rav Gidel, Amar Rav, and Rav Tavyumi Masni, Amar of Gidel, Amar Shmuel. They had a different yichus for this line. Minayin, she'ein nishpayin lav ar mitzvah. So where do I know that a person cannot take a shvuah to be over on a mitzvah? Tamalomar lo yachel divaro. A person cannot be meichel. A person can't. What's the word for meichel? He can't diminish or. He can't ultimately. What's a good word for yachel? To make it cheap. To desecrate it. Person can't desecrate his own words. In other words, divaro lo yachel. In other words, when a person says something, then he can't be meichel, he can't cheapen that, and ultimately just be over on what he says. Divaro lo yechel, v'meichel hu l'cheftzei shemayim. If he said something which is in contrast to cheftzei shemayim, to mitzvos, then indeed he can trying to find the right word for this. He can diminish or make cheap his own words. So Maishna is probably make his words profane. In other words, when a person says something, you have to be careful. Your words are important. If a person goes ahead and uses certain language, you have to uphold it. But if your language is language which goes in contrast with the Torah, then indeed, yes, you could be mechalel your words. So Maishna neder d'chsiv. Again, so fine. Now we understand why a shvuah can't work against the mitzvah. So Maishna Neder D'chsiv Ish Ki Yidar Neder LaHashem Lo Yachel Devaro. Person will take an neder to Hashem Lo Yachel Devaro. His words he can't be mechalel. But Shvua Nami Haksiv Oh Hishava Shvua LaHashem Lo Yachel Devaro. From the same language when it comes to a Shvua. So why is it when it comes to a Shvua, a person's Shvua does not take effect when he takes a Shvua against the mitzvah by a neder? It does work. Amar Abaya Hada Amar Hanoas Sukkah Alai. So it depends what he says. When a person says Hanoas Sukkah Alai, that works. Hada Amar Shvush Lo Ehena Min Sukkah. In such a case, it doesn't work. So Amar Rava V'Chimitzvahs Lehenas. We brought this up yesterday. Can you use the concept of Hana when it comes to a mitzvah? A mitzvah, you do it because Hashem said to do it. That's why we do a mitzvah, not because it brings us enjoyment, because it brings us benefit. Of course, as Aaron said yesterday, there's a lot of enjoyment which comes along as a fringe benefit of doing mitzvahs, that it's very enjoyable. But it's not given to us for Hana. So how could you use a neder that I'm not going to be neder from the sukkah? The function of a sukkah is not Hana. The function of a sukkah is to sit, v'tzila demnusa. Ela Amar Rava, Had Amar Yeshivas Sukkah Alai. The sitting of the sukkah should be forbidden on me. Had Amar Shvuah Shlo Eishei B'Sukkah. A person takes a shvuah that he won't sit in the sukkah. A person cannot take a shvuah that he won't sit in the sukkah. V'she'ein ishba'in lavar l'mitzvahs mihacha nafka. Is it true that the source that a person cannot take a shvuah to be over on a mitzvah that is learned from that pasuk? The problem is mihasam nafka. We have another place where we learned it from Tanya, where we learned in the right. So yachal nishbal levatas mitzvah v'lo bita yechayev. You would think that if a person took a shvuah, he took an oath to be mevatel a mitzvah, not to do a mitzvah, v'lo bitel, and indeed he did fulfill the mitzvah, yachal yechayev, you have to bring a carbon. Tamalomer lahara ulahetiv. The pasuk says in the Onefesh Kisishava Levatis Vasayim Lahara Lahativ, for good, for bad, or for good. So I would say Ma Hatava Rishos Af Hara Rishos, just like Hatava, the good side of it, the positive side of it is Rishos, the Hara side, the negative side of it is also Rishos. Yatsa Nishpa Levatos Mitzvahs Labitos Shein Rishos Biyadi. He doesn't have permission to determine whether he's going to do mitzvahs or not. So we have clear another source that a person does not have the right to take a shvuah to ultimately not do a mitzvah. So the Gemara says we have to have two sources. Why? Chad kol miftray mikarbon. You have to have one pasuk to patra him, to exempt him from being a carbon. Chad kol miftray mikarbon shvuah. One of them comes to say that if a person takes a shvuah not to fulfill a mitzvah, there's no need to bring a carbon. The other one is to patra him, to exempt him from the lav, the whole avera altogether. So that's why we have to have two psukim. Now, interestingly, just have a couple more minutes on the concept of sukkah and the idea of sukkah and mitzvahs and shvuos and the benefit that comes along with it. Yesterday I mentioned, when I was talking about sleep, an interesting shaila with sukkah. So there's another interesting shaila which is not necessarily relevant to our, specifically to our daf, but talking about a person forbidding others or forbidding themselves from using a sukkah. There was an interesting shaila that was asked in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, as well as here, a kosher restaurant generally will have a sukkah because they want to get business over Chol HaMoed. Now, in Israel, not all restaurants are owned by Shomer Torah mitzvahs, and not everyone who goes into a restaurant who is Jewish will eat in the sukkah. Many people in many areas are happy to go into a restaurant and just not eat their food in the sukkah. Rahman al-Islam. Now, there's a guy who, in a area of Eretz Yisrael, had a restaurant where there are other competing restaurants next door. And this guy was an observant Jew. He put up a sukkah outside his restaurant for his customers to be able to benefit from the sukkah. Now, what happened was, all the other restaurants had no sukkah. They didn't want to take on the expense of building a sukkah. And all the customers would go to whichever restaurant they want, and they say, hey, look, there's a sukkah right here. And the guy who owns, so aside from the fact that there could be issues with the hechsher, but let's just ignore the hechsher, that's just getting the technical issues in the way. But people were going to restaurant A and using the sukkah of restaurant B. So now, does the person who owns the sukkah from restaurant B have the right to tell the people, hey, listen, you can't eat in my sukkah. Go eat it on the street. That's a shaila was asked to a Rav. His own customers want to sit in the sukkah. They have to wait in line to get a table because guys from down the block are using his sukkah. So again, it would seem in a regular Chosh Mishpat area, this is my sukkah. This is my sukkah. You have no right to come in my own private property. But it happens to be this is a very serious shayla, because the mitzvah of arvus is such that and I think this is something which is overlooked. We always look at arvus on the positive side of it, which is that I could be motzi you with kiddush. Why does everyone have to have a whole glass of wine? I could do a mitzvah of making kiddush during the day. Everyone else is yotze with my mitzvah. Why does that work? The reason it works is because I'm connected to you. And if you have not yet fulfilled your mitzvah, there's something missing in me. The Sharatzian in Siman Taf Reish Nun Hey, I believe. Taf Reish Nun Hey uses a language when it talks about lulav. Sheharei im chasar lo, harehu kechasar li. If one person is not able to fulfill their mitzvah, or doesn't fulfill the mitzvah, even if they are able to, there's something missing in my kiyum of my mitzvah of sukkah. So my mitzvah of sukkah requires that I look out for other people's kiyum of the mitzvah of sukkah. So it's an interesting language of the Mishnah Berurah. He uses it in a few places, but it changes the whole perspective on arvus. Arvus is the reason why I can make kiddush for you is because as long as you didn't make kiddush today, there's something missing in my kiddush. So I have a connection to your kiddush, so I could do it for you. So in terms of psak halacha, there's a choshen mishpat area over here. It's my sukkah. But there's also another chiyuv over here that I have to look out for people who are not eating in the sukkah. Person's eating a sandwich outside the sukkah, so therefore there is a level of chiyuv upon me to see that you eat in your sukkah. Now, what's going to be the halach in that case? It's an issue for a beis din, exactly what should be done in that case. But it's not clear that he could forbid people that he has a right to forbid people from eating in the sukkah from a Yordea or a Chaim point of view. From a Chosh Mishpah perspective, perhaps. And it's related to our daf, because again, when it comes to a Shavua, sometimes a person can impose an Isra on themselves by astering themselves from the walls of the sukkah. But for a person to take a Shavua and say, you know what, I'm being misalik myself from this mitzvah. I'm removing myself from this mitzvah. I don't want to do it. I take a Shavua not to sit in the sukkah this year. I'm sorry, sir. It's possible that you don't want to benefit from that wood, but the mitzvah is already in agreement we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You can't just sever that mitzvah, so the shvuah doesn't even take effect. Why? Because I have pre-agreed agreements from beforehand. The same thing is true even with other people. There are chiyuvim that I have towards other people to see to it that they have an opportunity to sit in a sukkah. And even though from a choshen mishpah perspective, perhaps you want to rent my space, you have to pay for it, but to forbid people from eating the sukkah is not so simple. Have a wonderful day.
When I was in Israel, it was assumed, there was a sukkah.